All right, welcome everyone. Today we're taking a deep dive into the women's rights movement in the U.S.
Definitely a lot to unpack there.
Absolutely, it's a huge topic. And thankfully you sent in a ton of great sources that we're going to use to really dig into the history of the movement and see how it's evolved. And yeah, maybe even get into some of the current issues and debates.
Yeah. It's amazing to think how much has changed over the years and how far the movement has come.
Yeah.
But to really appreciate the progress, I think we need to kind of travel back in time,
Go back to the beginning.
Yeah, and understand what life was like for women before the movement really gained momentum.
Okay, so paint a picture for us. What were some of the limitations that women faced back then?
Well, just imagine a world where your options were limited simply because you were born female.
Wow.
Before the movement gained traction, women were largely confined to domestic roles, expected to be wives and mothers, first and foremost. And education was often considered unnecessary for girls, and they had very little control over their own property or finances.
It's hard to fathom that level of restriction in today's world.
Yeah, I mean, it was a reality for countless women, and perhaps most significantly, they lacked the right to vote.
Right.
Can you imagine living in a society where you had no voice in the political process?
I mean, it's mind-boggling.
Yeah.
It's hard to even imagine.
Absolutely.
So who were some of the key figures who dared to challenge these norms?
Well, that's where these incredible women, their stories come in. Susan B. Anthony, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, Lucretia Mott, Lucy Stone, Alice Paul.
Wow, what a list.
These were the trailblazers who just refused to accept the status quo.
Yeah, and speaking of Susan B. Anthony, one of the sources you provided actually mentions her arrest for voting in the 1872 presidential election.
Oh, wow.
What a powerful example of her commitment.
Yeah, that's right. It speaks volumes about the risks these women were willing to take to fight for their rights.
Right.
Their courage paved the way for one of the most significant victories in the movement's history, and that's the ratification of the 19th Amendment in 1920, which finally granted women the right to vote.
That must have been an incredible moment.
Absolutely. It was a hard-won battle, a testament to the tireless efforts of suffragists across the nation.
Right.
But it's crucial to remember that this victory didn't automatically translate to voting rights for all women.
That's an important point.
Women of color, especially Black women, continue to face significant barriers to voting, highlighting the complex intersection of race and gender within the movement.
Right.
This is something we can delve into further later on, as it's a concept that continues to shape feminist thought and activism today.
Yeah, I think that's definitely worth exploring more in depth.
Absolutely.
It seems like the right to vote, while a momentous achievement, was just the beginning of a much larger fight for equality.
Exactly. The movement continued to gain momentum throughout the 20th and 21st centuries, leading to significant legal and social advances.
Let's talk about some of those advances.
Okay.
The sources you provided mention the Equal Pay Act of 1963, which aimed to close the wage gap between men and women.
Yeah, definitely a landmark piece of legislation, but its implementation proved to be more complicated than initially envisioned.
Okay.
Despite the Equal Pay Act, discrepancies in wages persisted, leading to the need for further legislation, like the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act in 2009.
Wait, so why was another act needed if the Equal Pay Act was already in place?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
The Lilly Ledbetter Act actually addressed a loophole that made it difficult for women to challenge unfair pay practices.
Oh, I see.
See, the original Equal Pay Act required women to file a lawsuit within 180 days of the discriminatory pay decision.
Oh, wow.
Which was often impossible, as women were frequently unaware of the pay disparities until much later.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So the Lilly Ledbetter Act essentially strengthened the protections against pay discrimination and made it easier for women to seek justice.
Exactly. It demonstrates that the fight for equal pay is a continuous process, constantly evolving to meet new challenges and address those deeply ingrained biases within the system.
It's a reminder that progress isn't always a straight line.
Right.
What were some of the other key pieces of legislation that emerged during this period?
Well, in 1972, Title IX was passed, prohibiting sex discrimination in education programs receiving federal funds.
Okay.
This was a game changer for women in academics and athletics.
Yeah.
Imagine a time when girls were actively discouraged from pursuing higher education or participating in sports.
Wow.
Title IX helped level the playing field.
What a powerful impact.
Yeah.
It's incredible to think how much opportunity was denied to women simply because of their gender.
Right.
Were there any legal advances in terms of financial independence for women?
Absolutely. The Equal Credit Opportunity Act of 1974 gave women the right to apply for credit cards and loans without needing a male cosigner. This was a huge step towards women's financial autonomy, allowing them to control their own finances and build their own credit history.
I bet that was liberating for many women. It's like a whole new world of possibilities opened up.
It was a major shift.
Yeah.
And as the movement progressed, we saw further legislation addressing specific challenges women faced.
Right.
For instance, the Pregnancy Discrimination Act of 1978 protected pregnant women from job discrimination.
Okay.
Before this, women could be fired or denied promotions simply for being pregnant.
So this act helped ensure that women wouldn't be penalized for starting a family.
Exactly. And then in 1993, the Family and Medical Leave Act was passed, granting eligible employees unpaid leave for family or medical reasons.
Oh, yeah.
This recognized the importance of work-life balance and provided crucial support for working parents.
These legal advances represent significant strides toward equality, tackling specific areas where women were systematically disadvantaged.
You're absolutely right. Each of these victories was a direct result of the tireless efforts of countless individuals and organizations dedicated to advancing women's rights.
One of the most influential organizations in this fight has been the National Organization for Women, or NW.
NW, yeah.
What can you tell us about their role in the movement?
NW has been, a driving force since its founding in 1966.
Wow.
They've played a crucial role in advocating for legislation, challenging discriminatory practices in court, and mobilizing grassroots support for women's rights.
And their commitment is truly impressive. And the scope of their work is so broad.
Yeah.
The sources you provided list their 6 priority issues: reproductive rights and justice, economic justice, ending violence against women, racial justice, LGBTQIA+ rights, and constitutional equality.
These priorities actually reflect how the movement itself has evolved over time.
Okay.
It's not just about suffrage or equal pay anymore. It's about understanding how different forms of oppression intersect and impact women's lives in multifaceted ways.
So it's really a much broader, more holistic approach now.
Exactly.
That brings us to a concept that's central to understanding the movement's complexities: feminism.
Feminism, yeah, it's a term that often gets misconstrued.
Right.
At its core, it's about recognizing the societal prioritization of the male point of view and working towards dismantling the systems that perpetuate inequality between the sexes.
So it's not about hating men or seeking to overpower them, as might suggest.
No, not at all. Feminism is about advocating for a world where everyone, regardless of gender, has equal opportunities, rights, and freedoms.
Right.
It's about challenging harmful stereotypes and creating a society where everyone can thrive.
A society where everyone can thrive. I like that a lot.
Yeah. It's about recognizing that true equality requires addressing the root causes of oppression, not just the symptoms.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's like treating a wound.
Right.
You can't just cover it with a bandage. You need to address that underlying infection.
Exactly.
So how does feminism address these kind of deeper, more systemic issues?
Well, one crucial aspect is understanding intersectionality.
Okay.
Remember when we talked about how the 19th Amendment didn't guarantee voting rights for all women?
Yes. It highlighted the fact that women of color faced, unique challenges even after that milestone.
Exactly. Intersectionality acknowledges that different forms of oppression like racism, sexism, and classism, they don't exist in isolation.
No.
They intersect and overlap, creating very different experiences for individuals based on their unique identities.
So it's not enough to simply fight for women's rights as a whole.
Right.
We need to consider how those rights intersect with, other social justice issues.
Precisely. For instance, the fight for reproductive rights is deeply intertwined with economic justice and racial justice.
Okay.
Think about it. Access to affordable health care, including reproductive health care, is often determined by socioeconomic factors and systemic racism.
Right.
So you can't really separate those issues.
Yeah, I'm starting to see how all these pieces connect. It's about recognizing that women's experiences aren't monolithic.
Exactly. And this intersectional lens is crucial for crafting effective solutions and building a truly equitable society.
So where do we go from here?
Yeah.
What are some of the biggest challenges facing the movement today?
Well, one issue that keeps coming up in the sources you provided is the persistent gender pay gap.
Yeah, it's disheartening to see that women still earn less than men for doing the same work.
It's a problem that has persisted despite decades of progress.
Right.
And it's even more pronounced for women of color.
Right.
We touched on the Lilly Ledbetter Fair Pay Act earlier, but clearly there's still much work to be done.
What are some of the underlying reasons for this persistent gap?
It's a complex issue with multiple contributing factors.
Okay.
There are systemic biases within industries and hiring practices that often undervalue women's work.
Right.
And then there's the issue of occupational segregation, where women are disproportionately represented in lower paying fields.
And then there's the cultural expectation that women will take on the majority of caregiving responsibilities, which that can impact their career choices and advancement opportunities.
You've hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
It's a combination of these factors, and dismantling these deeply rooted systems of inequality requires a multi-pronged approach.
Right.
It's not a simple solution.
So it sounds like we need, stronger legislation to enforce equal pay,
Yeah.
but also like a cultural shift
Yeah,
that challenges these ingrained biases and expectations.
absolutely. It's a two-pronged battle, fighting for legal protections while simultaneously pushing for societal change.
Right.
And speaking of challenges, another issue that demands our attention is violence against women.
Oh, absolutely.
It's a global epidemic that shows no signs of abating.
It's heartbreaking to see how pervasive this issue remains.
Yeah.
What can be done to address it?
Well, we need a multifaceted approach that tackles the root causes of gender-based violence. This means challenging harmful cultural norms, promoting healthy relationships, and providing support for survivors.
The sources you provided mention the Violence Against Women Act, which seems like a step in the right direction.
It is. This act, reauthorized in 2022, provides crucial funding for programs that help prevent and address domestic violence, sexual assault, and stalking.
Okay.
However, its implementation and effectiveness vary across different regions, and there's always more that can be done to ensure its impact reaches all communities.
So it sounds like there's a need for both systemic change and these grassroots efforts to create a culture that truly prioritizes women's safety and well-being.
Exactly. It's about changing hearts and minds while also holding institutions accountable and demanding better protections for women.
Right.
And of course, we can't forget about reproductive rights, a topic that has been, fiercely debated in recent years.
Yes, the overturning of Roe v. Wade has had a profound impact on women's access to reproductive health care.
Absolutely. It's created a patchwork of laws across the country, with some states severely restricting access to abortion, while others are working to protect reproductive rights.
Yeah, it's a complex issue with strong opinions on both sides.
Yeah.
How do we navigate this landscape and ensure that women have control over their own bodies and reproductive choices?
It's crucial to center the voices and experiences of those most affected by these restrictions.
Okay.
We need to advocate for policies that prioritize women's health and autonomy, ensuring access to comprehensive sex education and safe, legal abortion care.
It's about respecting women's agency and their right to make informed decisions about their own bodies and lives.
Exactly. It's a fundamental human right that should be protected and upheld.
Right.
So, as we delve into these contemporary challenges, it's also important to consider how the feminist movement itself has evolved.
Right.
And what its main goals are in the present day.
Yeah, for sure.
What stands out to you from our conversations so far?
Well, one thing that strikes me is the growing recognition of intersectionality. It seems like the movement is becoming more inclusive, acknowledging the diverse experiences of women from different backgrounds.
That's a keen observation.
Yeah.
The movement is becoming more nuanced, recognizing that women isn't a monolithic category.
Right.
We're seeing a greater emphasis on amplifying the voices of women of color, LGBTQ plus women, disabled women, and those from various socioeconomic backgrounds.
It was really about broadening the scope and making sure everyone's voice is heard.
Yeah, it's about understanding that women's rights are human rights and that those rights are interconnected with other social justice movements.
It's not just about achieving equality for women in a narrow sense.
Right.
It's about creating a more just and equitable world for everyone.
Exactly. It's
That-
about recognizing that our liberation is bound together and that true progress requires a collective effort.
That's a powerful message, but it also feels like a daunting task.
Right.
Where do we even begin to dismantle these systems of oppression that affect us all?
Well, it starts with each of us.
Right.
It starts with recognizing our own biases, challenging discriminatory language and behavior, and supporting organizations that are fighting for equality. It's about educating ourselves and others, having difficult conversations, and using our voices to advocate for change.
So it sounds like it's not just about big sweeping changes.
Right.
It's also about the small, everyday actions we take
Yeah,
to challenge inequality in our own lives.
absolutely. Every action, every conversation, every vote can contribute to creating a more just and equitable world.
Wow.
It's a collective effort, and we all have a role to play no matter how big or small.
What do you see as the most pressing issue facing the movement today?
Ooh.
What should we be focusing our energy on?
That's a great question, and it's a tough one to answer
Yeah,
because there are so many interconnected issues that demand our attention.
right.
However, if I had to choose one, I'd say it's the erosion of democratic norms and institutions.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah.
How does that threaten women's rights?
When democratic principles are undermined, it creates an environment where minority rights, including women's rights, are more easily trampled upon.
Okay.
Think about it. We've witnessed a concerning rise in authoritarianism around the world in recent years,
Right.
coupled with the spread of misinformation and attacks on voting rights.
Yeah, definitely some scary trends there.
Yeah, it's concerning.
So you're saying that the fight for women's rights is inherently linked to the fight for democracy itself?
Exactly. When democratic institutions are weakened, it becomes easier for those in power to roll back the progress that's been made on women's rights.
Okay.
We see this happening globally, where authoritarian regimes often target women's rights as a means of consolidating their control.
Wow.
It's a chilling pattern.
That puts things into perspective.
Yeah.
It's not just about achieving specific legal or social changes. It's about protecting the very foundation of a just and equitable society.
Yeah, it really is. It's a sobering thought, but it also underscores the importance of staying vigilant and engaged in the fight for equality.
Yeah.
We can't take our hard-won rights for granted.
You're absolutely right. The women's rights movement isn't just a chapter in a history book.
Right.
It's a living, breathing force that requires ongoing participation and defense.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, it feels like we've only scratched the surface of this vast and complex movement.
Yeah.
We've journeyed from early limitations to incredible milestones and confronted some of the pressing challenges that persist today.
Yeah, we've covered a lot of ground.
It's been inspiring to witness the resilience
Yeah,
of these women and these organizations and the evolution of the movement itself.
absolutely.
What stands out to you as the most important takeaway from our exploration? I think for me, it's the profound realization that the fight for women's rights is just inextricably intertwined with the fight for a just and equitable world for everyone.
Right.
It's about dismantling systems of oppression that affect us all, regardless of gender, race, ethnicity, or sexual orientation.
It's about recognizing that our liberation is bound together
Yeah.
and that true progress demands a collective effort.
Exactly. And it's a powerful reminder that we all have a role to play in this ongoing struggle.
Right.
Whether it's challenging sexist language or supporting organizations that advocate for women's rights or simply having conversations with friends and family about these issues.
Right.
Every action counts.
It's about raising awareness, amplifying marginalized voices, and holding those in power accountable.
Absolutely. And it's about never giving up hope.
Yeah,
The women's rights movement has encountered countless setbacks and challenges throughout history.
of course.
Yet it has always persevered, adapting to new circumstances and finding innovative ways to fight for equality.
Yeah, that's a powerful reminder that change is possible, even in the face of seemingly insurmountable obstacles.
Absolutely.
Our deep dive has been a journey through history, but it's also a call to action for the present and the future.
I couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
As we conclude, I'd like to leave you with this thought.
Okay.
What will your contribution be to the ongoing struggle for women's rights? How will you use your voice, your actions, your influence to create a more just and equitable world for yourself and for future generations?
Yeah, that's a question worth pondering.
Is.
A challenge that I hope resonates with you long after this deep dive.
Yeah, me too.
Thank you for joining us on this insightful exploration of the women's rights movement.
And remember, the fight for equality is a marathon, not a sprint.
Right.
Let's keep running together, supporting each other every step of the way.